Derek Wheatley, and welcome to episode 191 of the Weekly podcast. Thank you very much for joining us wherever you are doing so. Eagle-eyed viewers may notice a slightly different background. I normally sit in this very small room with some movie posters behind me. I lugged my podcast equipment through the very wet streets of Dublin yesterday because I wanted to come up and get a few days away, but obviously I had this podcast lined up and I thought it'd be a perfect time to kind of bring it into a slightly different environment. So yeah, I'm not in my own place, as you can see. I didn't buy somewhere new. I want to thank Andrew Barrett for coming on last week. A lot of the lads who I train with will know Andrew through MMA, and he's opened up that new gym in Ballinasloe, the King's Court Academy, and trains very hard, and I'm delighted to say his gym's going well the first couple of weeks, so fair play to Andrew. You can support us and buy me coffee if you like. And let's get into our guest this week. She's a physical therapist and performance coach, Fiona Mernagh. How are you doing, Fiona?
Good, thank you very much for having me on.
You're welcome. Did I pronounce your second name correctly?
You did, actually, yeah, Mernagh. Yeah.
It's just because I should have asked before. I normally, because I got someone's name wrong before. It's the most mortifying moment of the whole podcast, I'll be honest. And it's just because, you know, the way if you're in Cork, it's Mernagh. Maybe, if you know what I mean. They differ, but I got yours right.
Yeah, I get a lot of Mernaghs though, so that's very impressive. You didn't pronounce the G.
Yeah, I would avoid the G. I'd say maybe because it's, you know, in a number of names, and it's in, like, you know, is it in Fermanagh? Am I spelling that right in my head?
Yep.
Yeah. So there's that. So maybe that's what got me away with it. But anyway, I winged it really. But thank you very much for coming on, obviously. And listen, we always start at the beginning, Fiona. Can you give us a short history of your upbringing, please?
Yeah, so I grew up in Dunboyne, County Meath. And when I was growing up, it was like a little village where you kind of knew everyone. Everyone knew everyone. So it was a bit gossipy. But it's actually since grown quite a bit. And it's more like, you know, a little town now. It's got the train station put in, the secondary school, loads more houses. So it's thriving now, and just a lot more people in it. But so growing up, it felt really nice. We'd be playing outdoors a lot on the street and stuff. I have two older sisters, one younger brother. We had a lot of freedom from our parents, which was great. And we would, that's kind of the main thing. I think growing up, I felt like I didn't want for anything, but it wasn't really like we had a lot of money either. So it was that kind of like atmosphere of like, I was grateful for everything at the same time as not feeling like I was ever limited with what I could do. So it was really nice in that regards. Family dynamics. My poor younger brother, I always think, with three older sisters, to tell him what to do all the time. I think he's a little scared from that. But otherwise, pretty good family arguments were normal. My older sisters would kind of fly off the handle a little bit at each other. My parents would also not be afraid to have the odd argument or whatever, but it was kind of just a very happy, we're still all close as well, still a very happy family upbringing. And so that was kind of what it was like, if I didn't ramble too much in different directions there.
Not at all. Was it kind of a sporty family, would you say?
Yeah. So and it's different for each of us. My next eldest sister, Emer, she would have been as competitive as me. Then my eldest sister, Linda, just didn't like the competitive element. And then my younger brother, it just depended. He's just a bit like, he's kind of got a lazy streak in him, or if he's in the moment, he's competitive, but it's hard to motivate himself. My mom loves sports, and she would have been shouting at the TV at every kind of sport, Wimbledon and horse racing, rugby, big one, and GA. So like we grew up with her shouting at TV and then being at our games and shouting at us if we were playing as well. And then my dad was big into karate. He had a wardrobe full of trophies and stuff. So growing up, he was really good at that. And he did it until for as long as he could, basically. So definitely a lot of sports in the family of interest.
That's good. I was thinking, like, well, obviously you are quite sporty, which we'll get into, but it's kind of interesting looking back on the kind of the family things and where it came from, and you know that, and not just sport, I suppose, and something else you mentioned, that kind of competitive thing as well, because it's kind of it really depends. Like my dad and my two brothers would be very competitive, whereas myself and my mom wouldn't be competitive at all, and would kind of, well, I couldn't speak for my mother, but definitely for me, it's kind of if a competition or something competitive comes into the sport that I'm doing, I'd kind of just back away from it a little bit. I become a little bit like, the fun's gone out of it. Like, it's not supposed to, but I think it's not supposed to be like that for me. So when I'm doing the sports I'm doing now, I just enjoy them in the actual aspect of turning up, getting it done, enjoying it, getting the takeaway from it, like everything, you get the takeaway from it, but never going, I missed out on that there, and I'm livid, but it doesn't come into me. But I'm always fascinated talking to people who are competitive for a number of reasons. Another thing we always ask, Fiona, is about when you first became aware of mental health.
Yeah, I'm not sure exactly what the timeline is. I just know around my adolescence, a few things happened that would make me aware of it. One of the bigger things, I suppose, of just awareness, but not direct contact with it, would have been my mom having a good friend. She worked with them, and she would have been going into work with them from the train station stuff because of where I live and stuff. So, but he was a depressed alcoholic. So he had those issues, and so you'd hear the odd thing, like, and just kind of where he'd be having a hard time. And then eventually, like, she kind of had to phase him out because it wasn't healthy, the way it ended up. So that was an exposure around, again, I'm not sure of timelines, my adolescence anyway. But then I also remember just being interested in psychology. So, which I think is the same thing. It's just understanding how the brain works. So I would have read, randomly, I just decided to start reading. The books I remember starting off with were like the differences between men and women.
Okay.
And they're just very silly. So I think I was fairly young, like I'm 14 or so when I was actually picking these up. So obviously I went for like the bright colors and the easy kind of graphics on it and stuff appealing to me. And I don't remember an awful lot from it, but just kind of, I've always liked science. So I
Yeah.
like scientific reasoning behind everything. That was an easy start. And then, yeah, one of my best friends, so I played table tennis a lot when I was younger. So I started when I was about 8 years old. And my best friend in that round, I'd say again, 16 years of age, maybe, she was diagnosed with social anxiety. So I was exposed like in that way as well. And didn't have any understanding of it. Like, this is before, I think it is much better now.
Yeah.
Like, there's just so much more information. The internet basically can be really good for that. So I just like take direction from her and just kind of understand whatever you need. Like, I'm good with that or whatever. I don't I just kind of go with whatever you say is we need to do or whatever. But I didn't really understand a lot of what was happening. And then for myself, I suppose the big thing, again, adolescence, I went through like my own kind of form of sports related kind of anxiety, I suppose, in that when I was playing table tennis, again, I would have gone through this little patch where I was young and I was playing, as I said, from about 8 years of age, and I got good quickly, and then I started winning a lot. And I didn't think anything of it, but it was a small sport as well. So when I say I'm winning a lot, I'm winning, like, I'm beating the same girls, like 10 to 12 of us probably in all Ireland competitions at under 12, and it's happened for a few years, and you get the attention and stuff. And then something happened, probably just like hitting puberty and just getting a little bit more self-aware. And I suddenly realized I'm supposed to win. And am I winning? Kind of winning mattered more. And so then once I had my first loss in a final, it like hit me hard or whatever. And then from there, I just had years, the rest of that playing career actually just was a struggle until I had to actually quit. And then it was in my 20s, I kind of figured everything out from that.
Right.
It was kind of retrospective, kind of self-help
Yeah.
in a way, just to understand it. So that was kind of a few ways in which I was exposed to it.
Yeah. The interesting thing you touched on there was to do with psychology and how you started reading about psychology. I think I was actually just weirdly enough, well, not weirdly, but I was talking to someone last night about psychology, and I was talking about this podcast as well, in general about like mental health and, the connections obviously between the two. And maybe about, how it's introduced to schools, mental health. And look, I was talking to people who are a lot younger than I am, who are just out of school, we'll say, and who had been introduced to it in certain ways as speakers come in. But I'd be interested to see, are they linking the two together? Is there like some part of the educational, curriculum that they are talking about psychology? Because it would be fascinating for students to learn, the background to their own psychology and to psychology in general, but also like maybe the trigger points that might come with like your friend, like social anxiety, for instance, being one, but like, depression and everything else that goes along with that. I just think it'd be really interesting to add into schools.
Definitely. Like I think it's so overlooked, because if you can't manage your own internal dialogue, say, very well, then how are you going to be successful? Like you're minimizing or limiting, sorry, the success that you can have with everything else.
Yeah.
So it just makes complete sense to work from the inside out like that.
Yeah, and like, and I don't know. Like, obviously, they may be doing that, but it's just the way there's not many people of your age at the time picking up books about psychology. It's just not a done thing, which is brilliant that you were doing it, and I'm sure there's people probably listening to this going, well, that's not true, but you know what I mean. I'd say in the percentage wise, it's in the low that are doing it. So physical therapy, like, what was it that got you interested in that? Why did you want to become a physical therapist?
Well, originally I did analytical science in DCU, and I ended up working in pharmaceutical companies as a quality control analyst, and I hated it. And I hated it from year one, and I knew I had to find out what other career I want to do. So I spent a few years trying to figure out. I was like, do I want to be a teacher? Do I do this, that, or the other? And then because it would be so difficult to go back and pay full fees and not work at the same time and everything, eventually I was like thinking, oh yeah, and also I love sport.
Yeah.
And so initially the reason I didn't do a kind of career choice that was in sport was kind of a really silly reason. I just thought that, well, I want to keep sport as my hobby, and then maybe I'll pick a job where I kind of use my mind a bit more, or just where it has a different kind of challenge intellectually, essentially. But I that was kind of silly and looking back. But nevertheless, I ended up then finding this course that would run over 3 years on weekends, so I could work and pay for it and do it at the same time. And I realized after I tore my ACL is what the big moment was.
Okay.
So I tore my ACL, going through the rehab for that. And the physiotherapist I had at the time, Mark McCabe, he was just really good at explaining things along the way. And then I realized, oh, there's a whole lot of science behind this. And then, as I said earlier, I really like science. So like that really got me intrigued. And then I was like, and I really like the strength conditioning side of it too. So I knew from then like that the end product that I wanted to be, or the end kind of person that I wanted to be with that career move. So I found that course, and then started studying strength conditioning myself as well, because you could do it a little bit more self-directed and take an exam at the end that I did, and get qualified that way. And then I did an internship and other little kind of weekend certs as well, just to back it up some more.
Oh yeah, like when I was growing up, again, the naivety of it. Say I was really into football when I was young, and a professional footballer gets injured, maybe they tear the ACL, and they're out for 9 months. And my thought process was, so they don't do anything for 9 months, and then they're back. There's nothing happening in the meantime, and then they come back. So when I got injured, and again, it was I had a slight shoulder thing, but then I had a tear in the meniscus. So I was kind of like very frustrated, obviously, having to miss training and things like that. But I went to a pain and movement specialist in Athlone who's been on this podcast, and he's brilliant. But he started talking to me about pain and the idea of just pain in general and how we think about it. And I was fascinated by this, I had never thought about it in the way he was explaining it to me. And he kind of mentioned about the approach to injury for him was, you don't obviously just stop. You still work around it. You do certain movements, and then, if they feel all right, come back to me next week, and then we'll try and pick it up a little bit. And all this kind of thing was just breaking it down for me. And I've seen that in your videos on Instagram as well, the kind of different movements that you do. When someone comes to you then, like with something like, say, an ACL, like what is your approach to pain and kind of rehabilitation?
Yeah, so it's really different for every person. It depends on where or what the injury or issue is. So if it's a really clear thing, like they've had an ACL operation, it's easier because they know exactly what they're working with. They know exactly what's happened, and they're bought in because they realize they've been cut open. They could barely walk on their leg. It's very clear to them that they need to work hard to actually get back to normal. And if they want to play their sport as well, there's so much talk about in terms of like an ACL as well, and so that they know what the path is ahead of them really already, and
Yeah.
they know other people who've gone through it because it's such a common injury as well. When you get somebody else who maybe has back pain and their scans aren't showing anything, and then you've got a totally different situation on your hands. You've got to really, really help them kind of try not to find the diagnosis, because it's like, listen, it's non-specific back pain is literally the
Yeah.
diagnosis for a lot of that case, those cases. So you're trying to help them see where their power really is, what they can control, what they can influence, and how their reaction to their pain is going to influence their recovery or not. So, but it's tough because it's not like there's nothing there. It's just that the back is getting stressed out sometimes with movement patterns or with too much of a certain activity. And it's just a balancing game. So though the mind is totally involved, the body is also involved. So you're trying to manage it from both angles. So it's really important that the person feels like educated about what's going on, knows what they can control and influence, and then feels positive about the path moving forward. So you need to kind of really reassure them with a good plan, I think, and understanding, well, we're going to try and get you doing this first of all. And if you can't do that, like that's our limiting factor. So we have to get you past this. So then we can move on to this. And then when you can do all this, you should be in a way better place. That pain could come, go, could stay for a long time at the start. We don't know when that pain is really going to change. So I can't give you that answer. But we're just going to focus on the actual movements and what you can do physically, most of all, and then work with things as they happen. We'll just deal with them.
Yeah, I think like the approach that people have towards injuries and pain. I mean, people who aren't like, trained like yourself, but I just mean, people who have injured themselves out running or whatever it might be, is to either plow on and just keep,
Yeah.
Get a calf injury, just keep plowing on. I'm speaking from experience recently. But that idea of like, I've got something, in the future that I'm training for. So I'm just going to try and plow on and get to that event, which like 99% of the time is going to fail like miserably, But, and then I think the other approach is obviously to sit back and do nothing, because I think people, when I was speaking to Kieran about this, like, people don't think of physical therapists straight away that will come into their head to help them. It's like, I'll get a massage, like, and look, massages have their own place as well, and they're great, and I love a good massage, but it's not the same thing. It's not how we were working together when, say, I was trying to sort out my knee. So I do, when I'm on this, on the foot that had the problem with the knee, and I'd hop to this side and hop to this side and use these different movements for stability and see if my knee could take it. And another thing that you just mentioned there was the idea that, like, in 2 weeks' time, it might feel better. A week after that might be sore again, and you're kind of dejected. The idea of like, oh, I'm after going backwards, when that not necessarily is the thing. It might be just your knee telling you, you're working on it. Like it's giving kind of the idea. So where do you think that, like, if people come to you, where do you think that the approach to injury is at the moment for people who aren't, knowledgeable in that sense?
Yeah, so it kind of depends. So the other thing to understand as well, just for says, the pain, where it can come from as well. Understanding that everything influences, all the systems influence each other, is really useful, I think, sometimes, because when you realize that it's not just the physical activity you do, but it's also all the work related, family stress related stuff as well that's going on. You can be dehydrated, bad night's sleep. Circulation is worse. And if your circulation is worse, things are going to feel more restricted and tight. You might not really notice that, but you might just notice your pain is going on more easily. So other things come into it as well. So for people coming in with an injury and they just don't know what's going on, I just spend a lot of time explaining it, and I put it in layman's terms as much as I can. So I'll always ask them a bunch of questions about their lifestyle and where did the pain come from, when did it start, what's it feel like. Then we'll do an assessment. So then I'm trying to narrow down where is the pain actually coming from, or why they got injured. If it's a specific injury like a calf as you're out running, like why did the body suddenly get hurt in that run and not all the other ones you've done previously? So then once I have those kind of clues, I'll give my kind of best clinical reasoning for what's going on and just explain. So now the body needs this to start with. And I have a little chart on my wall now. And it's just kind of, there's an early phase, middle phase, late phase, rehabilitation steps to go through. So some people will be starting actually kind of mid to late. Some people come in really early. They're very responsible, or they're scared. A lot of people come in quite scared that they've started to get this pain. They've got a marathon in a month and they need to make sure it's okay, which is cool. Other people will start early. Some people have waited really long, so they're going to be in that early phase for a while because it's become a pain that they've had for at least a year or more. That's going to be harder to shift, especially if they've got it coming from places of stress and anguish. Something happened, a little bit of traumatic incident the year before, whatever the case is. If they've had a lot of other injuries as well, the body is less adaptable, so it has less ability to get around the fact that another body part is hurt because it's already had restriction. So everyone will be different in that regard, and just trying to explain to them, this is what we're doing, because this is what you need to start off with. That's where we're going to go to, and then we'll take it bit by bit.
Yeah, I think that's where I noticed, like, the reassurance of it all helped me a lot. It lifts the mind, which is a horrible thing when you are injured, because where you go in your head is like, I'm never going to get back from this. But when somebody says to you, look, this is exactly what this injury is, if you can narrow it down, and then you say it'll take maybe this length of time, we'll be grand, we'll get back to this thing, and all of a sudden there's a weight off you when you come out of the because it's a lot of it is, especially if you're someone who trains a lot, like if you think this is being taken away from me for 2 or 3 months, a lot of it is that it's like the idea that the kind of crushing idea comes in that you're not going to get the train. So I think you almost become a therapist as well as a physical therapist, really.
Yeah, you do. You really do have to, because pain science is such a big thing now as well. And we would have talked a lot about it in our final year in college. So just understanding that there are so many other things that come into play. And if a person is not very hopeful about their prospects, and they're less likely to actually move if they're afraid of doing things because they're afraid of the pain and they think it's going to come back. I'm always a little bit disappointed if a client comes back and says, oh, I had a bad day, and so I stopped doing all the exercises. And it's been like if it's only been a week, it's not too bad or whatever. But if I left them for 2 or 3 weeks and they didn't do the exercise then for like the 2.5 weeks or whatever, it's like, I wish you would just message me.
Yeah.
Or like, you gotta be like, the exercises I give at the start are designed to be ones that shouldn't aggravate. So if you get your symptoms, you just need to actually find those movements that you can do again. And it is a learning journey as well along the way. Like, you're with your body 24/7, and I'm only seeing you for less than an hour at a time. So, and you could be a complete stranger, first time meeting you and stuff. So everything that you are experiencing along the way becomes relevant, and the more you kind of are willing to experiment as well, the more data you get, and the more successful you'll probably be in the end. Because it's definitely not as simple as a lot of people like to ask for steps and reps as well. And it's like, well, do it until if you feel like you're improving is the best to do it. But I'll still say 3 by 10 or whatever for some people who just need numbers.
Yeah.
I get that. But really, you're hoping they're like trying to just see improvements in themselves, and oh yeah, that feels really good actually, or it's a bit too easy, I'm going to do more reps now because I've gotten to a certain level or whatever.
Yeah, I wonder how often it happens, that thing of, someone goes away and doesn't follow up or doesn't do the things they're supposed to do. Because when I think of when I started doing cognitive behavioral therapy, and I was given this homework, and at the start I was like, I'm not, I'm whatever age I was at the time, 30 or whatever, and I was thinking, I'm not going to do like homework. But then after a week or two of maybe avoiding the issue, and then going back and almost feeling like embarrassed and ashamed that I hadn't done it, like why hadn't I done it? I didn't have an excuse. I started to think, but this is for me. So when I was doing the rehabilitation for the injury, I was like, do it when you're like watching TV, or when you're, whatever it might be. There's so many things where we are like sitting around in the evening where we could do it, just those little kind of reps that you say, like, that we could, fit it in at that time of the day, because it's not for, I'm not going to you for you. Like, I'm not trying to impress you. I'm just trying to get better. That's the whole point of it. If like, so what would like, I obviously introduced you as a physical therapist and a performance coach. For people who don't know, what is a performance coach?
So essentially, I just want people to be able to perform their sport in particular. So strength and conditioning coach, I'd happily
Yeah.
go with that title as well. But I like to think a performance is great because you can be a performer but not be competing in a sport. So like you can think of yourself as just trying to be able to play with your kids in whatever capacity that is, run after them, chase them, play some tennis with them, whatever that might be. You can think about it as being a 70-year-old who wants to be able to garden all the time
Yeah.
as well, and she wants to be able to get up and down off the ground. So things like that as well really appeal to me. But on the stricter kind of sports performance side of things, what I'm basically doing is some personal training, some one-on-one training, but mostly online programs.
Yeah.
So I'll be writing out the strength conditioning programs for people to do on their own, and then they can check in with me whenever they like. Some people book in for full sessions. Some people have monthly memberships, or have just a handful of people on those. So they get a mixture of the physio and the S&C. So they're getting both ends of the spectrum covered so that they can compete in their sport, hopefully in like not miss any games throughout the year, essentially, because they're keeping on top of this in both ways.
Yeah, I saw you doing some cleans in in the videos that you do on Instagram, and it got me kind of thinking about something that happened to me with the knee. So the knee was getting injured, and I was having trouble with tendonitis in the knee as well. So it was kind of like, not that it was sore, but I was kind of frustrated with it because it was constantly annoying me. And then it's in the back of your mind, oh, I have to do squats today, so that's going to be like something that I'm going to be irritating the knee. So one of my coaches said to me, look, we'll work on the muscles around the knee, and we'll strengthen the muscles around the knee, and which will take some of the pressure off it. And I was also at the time, I still am. So I'd say at the time I was eating healthy, but I kind of still am. But I was looking after myself. And that idea never really came to my mind, because obviously I didn't have a clue of the idea of strengthening around the injury once the injury is healed. It's a thing that, like, all I thought about was, once his injury is healed, hopefully I won't get injured again. It was never like, how can I step it up? Is that part of it that comes in for you? If say you have a client that is doing the physio and maybe doing some strength and conditioning as well, are we tying those two things together then?
Exactly. Yeah.
Right.
So I want to know their history. I want
Yeah.
to know what other injuries they've had in the past, because your injury risk basically goes up with any sort of previous injury. So but ideally, like, if you've really fully rehabbed it, then it should be easy to maintain it.
Mm-hmm.
But sometimes people go through one thing after another for a year, and when they're not using any strength conditioning plans or whatever, and they haven't really gotten used to using a physio, so then they don't know what they're doing. Like I said, they keep resting, and then they go back,
Yeah.
and then they get hurt again, and it's something else. But then they rest, and then they go back, and then they realize, oh, okay, I think I need a bit of professional guidance here. So then we'll focus on their injury, because a lot of people do come to me first because they can play, but they have some sort of a niggling injury that they're a bit concerned about, or that holds them back. So they'll have something like shin splints, which means that every so often they just have to sit out of training for a week or two. And so they want to get a good off season in before training starts again. And so we focus on actually reducing that pain if they're still having pain, then making it stronger to prevent it from actually coming back, and building up their load progressively so that they're able to run pain-free. And then we can focus more on the performance aspects. Now, we will focus on that a lot along the way as well, but just the actual bias of the training will be more towards that injury, complete rehabilitation of it, and then just working on other things that we can around it in order to enhance their ability to perform. But a real strength and conditioning program is like 100%, you're able to do everything. So it's kind of it's a higher intensity. So, but we're trying to get them to that point where they can just then focus on the strength conditioning aspect. And ideally then by the time they get through their first season where they've had very little injuries, then that second off season, they're able to just hit the road running with high intensity trainings, because they've built up so much ability to tolerate it up to them.
Excellent. What's your position? This is just something that kind of I notice in the gym a lot, and I don't really know. Maybe it's because this is what I just thought everybody should do, and it seems like the right thing to do. But people have told me since. Now, listen, there's a lot of physical therapists in that's in quotation marks in the gym. All right, they know a bit of everything. But what's your position on stretching and before and after training?
Yeah, I like just static stretching or any sort of mobility.
So okay, so if we'll do it for jiu-jitsu, so a lot of warm up for jiu-jitsu is obviously necks, backs, mostly, hips obviously as well, but I think necks in particular, because if someone tries to choke you, you obviously you go rigid everywhere, and a lot of pressure comes on the neck, and if they do choke, even more pressure comes on the neck. But I think it's just interesting to see the kind of split. Now, I'm one of the older guys in the gym, not the oldest, but one of the older ones. But then, a lot of young lads will just walk up the stairs and jump on the mats and start rolling. And then it's, I think it's because I just been, since growing up and seeing on people on TV, sports people on TV are always stretching before they train, and or a match or whatever it is. And it just seems the right thing to do for me. What would you think on that?
I think if you're doing something that's a sport or whatever, you want like jujitsu rather than just weightlifting, for example, in the gym, where with weightlifting, I still like to do some sort of mobility work beforehand to just make sure the joints are able to move in full range of motion and don't feel bad that day or freaky. Also increase your circulation, just get a little bit warm. And it's just good to be able to move well anyways. And it makes sense to put it at the start of the workout because rather than the middle or the end, really. So it's just kind of handy to place it there. If you're doing something like jiu-jitsu or any sort of sport and running, it makes sense to warm up if you're going to be going into that higher intensity as well. So, or awkward positions where, again, someone could be getting you a chokehold essentially, or like really gripping you down, and you're going to have to use a lot of force. So that way your nervous system isn't shocked in the certain positions that you'll get in suddenly. Now, with young people, of course, they're way more able to just go into it straight away.
Yeah.
And if I'm not sure how young you're talking about, but like certainly children and stuff, they're not able to exert that much force on each other.
Yeah.
So if they're just fighting each other, there's not too much going through them. So it's really as you get older and bigger, and depending on the opponent's size difference and stuff like that, it's going to matter more. If you're able to just warm up with the activity itself, so a lot of people do that, they'll just start with like deadlifts, like a light deadlift.
Yeah.
Next set is a bit heavier, next set. So they're doing their warm up in the exact movement that they're about to do. So that's another way to do it, but it just depends on the complexity of the movement that's coming up and how much of a stiff person you are as well. Whether it's an evening workout and you've just sat at a desk all day, for example, is it cold outside? Are you physically cold when you came in? Do you just need a little bit of mental winding? Kind of be helpful for you to make a transition between what you were just doing before you go into this set, so that you actually feel like you're present, if you like, but also just like you feel like you're ready for it and you've let go of any other sort of thoughts in the day, and you get to enjoy the session fully by just doing a few simple things to start with. I think I would not have a black and white answer basically, but I would certainly think that for adults, doing mobility work is good for you. Static stretching doesn't really help with performance, so there's no need to do that. You might like to do it though, and if you feel good doing it, go for it.
Yeah, I think for me, it's kind of good practice for me. I like doing it, and I just do it now because I'm used to doing it. When I'm teaching the class in jiu-jitsu, I always make them do it because maybe it's just because I think it's good practice. I don't know. It doesn't I know what you mean. Like, so the youngest will be about 16 and then they'll be, obviously getting older as they come in. So it's good practice. When I'm teaching CrossFit, we do it slightly differently. Obviously, you obviously know a lot about this. The like you mentioned, saying deadlift and just having a pipe where we're just having them use the deadlift position on the pipe just to warm up the hamstrings and that, to get the mobility going. And it's interesting the way you kind of separated the two, because there is a completely different things happening in those two sports. But I always even before I go for a run, I'm not saying I'm go 20 minutes a warm up, but just, getting the legs moving and stuff like that. So it's just in my mind, I feel like I should, but it's interesting that I'm always every time I hear one of the lads, and they're not much younger than me, the lads who would say about they're not stretching, I'm like, oh God, but you've kind of confirmed that it's okay. If it's up to yourself, really, I can't give out about that anymore, unfortunately, but I'll find something else to give out. But how rewarding is this job for you? Do you really enjoy it?
I do. I moved into my own place this year as well, actually, which has made a big difference. And I realized, I'm really enjoying it to the most that I can now. It's a lot more freedom, that even though the place I rented before, and I was there for 5 years, they were they gave me a lot of freedom. Like I was able to come and go when I wanted, and But it still just wasn't my place. So things weren't maybe set up the way I would have them set up, and the rooms weren't necessarily laid out the way I would want them laid out and stuff. So it was just that little bit of a difference that now, like, just there's no one I have to go through for just asking for times and stuff and availability, and I can place things up wherever I want, and I can equipment, whatever equipment that would make sense for me and stuff, and keep it whatever order I want as well. So that's great. But then working with people, it's extremely nice, especially when you hear back from them, say, and the odd person leaves a review as well, which is really nice after you finish with them and they're just really happy with their results. When you see people achieving in their sport, like ultimate Frisbee you mentioned is my main one, and I work with a lot of athletes in that. So then when they get successful in their season and they're like, they send a little thank you message or whatever, it's really nice to hear from them, or just to see it. I don't need a thank you, I'll just be really happy for them anyway. But in that sense, it's really good. It is tough because I don't know any therapist in the world who can help every patient 100% of the time or anything like that. So it's tough when you really want to give more and you just don't know why the person isn't responding the way that another person would maybe. But also it's just very motivating then to keep learning. I'm just constantly learning. Finding new things.
But that's like, you're the type of person that someone would want to go to, because it's very easy to kind of get to a point where you're like, oh, this is great. I know everything now, and I can just lay it down my tools and just relax into it. You know, that's not what I want to hear back. Do you know what I mean? I don't think anybody should want to really hear that back, is that the person is keep learning, especially for those things that, like you mentioned, are harder to diagnose, like lower back pain or whatever it might be. They're tricky, you know, body parts to kind of diagnose. So, you know, it is difficult in that way, but the place looks great as well. Like, from what I've seen, it looks class. So I think people love walking into somewhere that's like set up proper, like this is professional place. Oh, wow. But we'll get into a bit in the end, where people can find you and all that, and we'll go through it all. So I had a friend of yours, Sarah Melvin, on a segment which I was trying to figure out the name of, and I remembered it. It was called Live and Joyful. All right, I figured it out. And Sarah came on to talk about ultimate Frisbee, and at the time I just thought, like, well, I didn't know what it was, basically. And there's going to be a lot of people listening to this now that doesn't know what it is. Can you kind of break down what it is, and maybe, you know, some of the ways to win? Because everybody know in rugby, score goal. In football, what do you do in ultimate Frisbee to win?
Yeah, so it's a little bit like scoring a try, or in American football, where you have to catch the disc, the Frisbee, in an end zone. So there's an end zone on either end of the pitch. It's just marked out, and there's a central playing zone. You're trying to work the disc up from one end zone to the other to catch it in there, and then that's a goal. There are 7 of you on each team. You're not allowed to run when the Frisbee is in your hands, so you have to just pivot around and try and find someone, a bit like you pivot in basketball. So then you're allowed to pass off. You only have 10 seconds with the disc. If someone is counting from the other team, they'll count to 10. If you still have it, then you have turned over the disc. If you drop it, or it goes out of bounds, or hits the floor, or a defender runs through and actually hits it away, then that is a turnover, and the other team gets to take possession. So it really challenges you to try and be perfect in a way, because you can't scramble for the disc when it's on the ground or whatever. It's just changing possession to the other team. You play games to 15, and they can be anywhere from 60 to 100 minutes long, depending on the tournament.
It's pretty intense as well. I watched it, you know, a while ago when I was talking to Sarah. Pretty intense sport too. It
is, yeah, loads. Like, and the problem is the intensity has gone up, and then the injuries go up as well, which I suppose is not a problem in my position. But it's gone up and up and up. So there are national teams as well who compete at the European World Championships every 4 years. They're on. The speed of the game is what makes it really fun, because it's a lot of sprinting and hard turning, jumping, laying out, which means diving to the ground to try and catch the Frisbee before it hits the ground, and it makes it very exciting.
Where did you first kind of discover it?
In college. My older sister, who I talked about earlier, the competitive one, Emer, she played, and I just knew as soon as I got into college, I was going to do it. Now, there's a really fun social element to it as well, so that's really what appealed to me mostly as well. And the fact that every sport that I had an opportunity to play when I was growing up, I was like, yeah, I'll play. So she was going abroad to tournaments like Berlin and New Year's Eve kind of tournaments. It was indoor beach tournaments, like they throw
Oh,
someone in the hall and stuff. So so it would be party mixed with sport, and obviously in college, that's a really nice combination. So as soon as I went to DCU, I joined, and I just played only a little bit because I was playing other sports in my first year, but then slowly ultimately took over. So I kind of dropped the other sports and took it on more and more from second year on.
I'm guessing it's an American sport.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, they do love a bit of frisbee in America, to be fair to them. But
Yeah.
it's you've been fairly successful with it.
Yeah. So in our first bit of success was in 2015 with the Irish mixed team. We came second though. It was actually, we did so well last season. We were winning other tournaments. When we came to the European Championships, unfortunately, Great Britain beat us in the final. But then our big success really came in 2019 with the Irish women's team, which Sarah Melvin was captain for, and we took home the gold. And Ireland's women hadn't been in the top 8 before. So
Wow.
to take on, like, it was so great. It was a really good campaign, really good celebrations afterwards as well. Got to go visit the president, and a few other things in the papers and everything. And then last year, well, this is not my success, but we had a men's team actually win the European Club Championships, which is a big deal. So that's Ranelagh. So I work with them actually. I am physio for some of them, and then I give them their strength and conditioning plans to work with as well.
It's it sounds like something that's growing, obviously, because with success, things will grow and people hear about it more. Because like I mentioned, I didn't know what it was. And when I spoke to, people around me, when I said that Sarah was coming on, and then I was talking to them about you coming on, that, this ultimate frisbee, and it grows with success. Like if you hear that an Irish team or, the Irish team or a club team in Ireland has won something, obviously people, they'll prick up their ears, kind of a thing, that they kind of get into it. And I think we talk about a lot in jiu-jitsu, and the fact you mentioned with your dad, karate was the only thing around, a number of years ago. And it opened up then to different kind of sports, like judo obviously started becoming more popular, and then jiu-jitsu now is probably becoming more popular as things go on. And the same that'll happen with something like ultimate frisbee, because it's completely different, and I think people like that, and it becomes more reachable online. Like I can just type it into YouTube, and then you can watch a game of it, and you're like, that's a new thing on me, but it looks great. I've seen some weird stuff on YouTube, actually. You like, well, not, obviously, but I mean, I'm talking about sports where there's one where, like, I don't know if you've seen this one. I think they mix MMA and handball. So it's like, so they have like a football size yoke, and they have to get it from one end to the other, like you were saying. But you can literally like jump on the person, like, and hold them there, and it's so bizarre. I'll try and think of the name of it. I'll send it on to you, because you have to have a look at it now that I've said it, because once you're sitting on top of that person, they can't get up, like, so then they're out of the game. So they're sitting on them while everything's going on around them. And I thought to myself, like, I wouldn't do it, but I'd say if it came over here, people would be mad to do it, like, because it's kind of, it adds the sporty with the athletic, which I know are two different things, but then, the bit of aggression as well. But I think ultimate frisbee is one of those ones where it adds the sporty definitely with the athletic, because of what you were saying, like, people love diving around anyway, like, just kind of get involved in that way. And I think it's great. Like, I like when new sports come along, I suppose, and I want to hear people kind of talk to people about them, and they're so passionate about it, because then I can kind of nerd out on my own stuff and not feel it's bad for boring people, if you know what I mean. So what's the story then with the season? Then is it something that goes on during the summer? Is it stop in the summer? How does it work?
So it used to be there was no off season at all. And then people realized I'm exhausted and need an off season. So if you're a college player and you're a serious club player, you don't get really any time off, because the colleges come in around September, October. So they keep going obviously till like the April-ish time of year. And then that is when, like, March, April is when the club season will really pick up. It depends. Some people will start a little bit earlier, January, February, and depends on the club itself if they want to. We're not, but the big tournaments will all take place during the summer months up till September. And then October, the first weekend of October is when the European Club Championships take place. They're on every year. So there's one on in a couple of weeks.
Yeah.
And then right after that, that's kind of the start of the off season. It depends though as well if there are Irish teams that year. So like this last year just gone, there was an European Championships were on again. They were on in Limerick, by the way.
Okay.
But so you would be picking the teams then around October, November. So people are kind of going into trials, and then they might get the off season depending on how the coach wants to plan out their seasons. They get about 8 to 10 weeks off maybe before their first official training weekend, which will happen once a month from January, typically.
Yeah.
Again, and so it's a little bit different depending on what level you're playing at and what age you are.
So when do you go again? A couple of weeks?
So I took it really handy this year because I decided to focus on my business. I didn't go for the Irish teams, and I just played with one club because sometimes there are mixed divisions and open and women. So open is essentially men's, but you can be any gender to play it. But then there's women's and mixed. And I had been playing on women's teams, and then I came back to my original mixed club Jabba last year, and then I just decided to focus on Jabba the Hook this year, and I started coaching them as well. So I just decided I didn't even attend foreign tournaments, both just investing a lot of money in the business as well.
Of course.
This year, it just wasn't something I could commit to. And so it's been great, but I'm going to be going into more of an off season now, and then I'll decide what level I want to play at next year, really. But the World Championships are on in Australia next year, so no Irish teams are really going because we're all paying it out of our own money and pockets and stuff. So it's just not easy, and we're not at the numbers like in terms of players in the country. We just need a couple of thousand more would be great. But no, we need like several hundred more, and so that there isn't such a drain on the energy, and we have enough players at a few tiers, so there's more social play as well, and so then it's easier to kind of focus on the higher level. But at the minute, everyone's mashed in together, kind of playing all the same tournaments and stuff.
Was it difficult to pull back last year? Obviously, the business is more important. I get that, but like just for yourself, was it quite difficult to do that?
It wasn't. I've been doing it for a long time. So since 2008, that was my first Irish team in 2008. So, and I was pretty much on whatever big team that happened for a good few years after that. I didn't miss a season with the Irish team with my ACL tear, but it took me out obviously for a year and a bit. So then it was just really like Frisbee was coming first all the time, and I would just say yes to every single tournament, any abroad and national. So then as well, because it had a couple of European medals, silver and the gold, it was like, well, I kind of did a lot. Last year I did play Masters as well. It was on in Limerick again. They just did such a good job hosting Masters. That's why they got the Euro bid this year to host as well. But so I did a lot. I was like this. I did like Masters on home soil, and so did pretty well at that tournament. Like not medal result or anything, but I played well. The team gelled well, and we got a good result. I think we 7th in the world. So it's pretty decent, and got to play against some good American teams. So I felt quite fulfilled.
Yeah.
And I needed, if I was going to play, I would have needed a lot more novelty. And there just wasn't that impetus, and it wasn't that it was just a different vibe from the team that was going into it and stuff. So.
Yeah, I get that. I understand. It's I suppose gets to a point where you're kind of like other things come before it, and it's levels of importance at that point, and obviously we need to pick the things that we need to pick. Like your business is something that's kind of growing, and you need to concentrate on that. Another question we always ask Fiona is what do you like to do in your spare time?
Spare time, I have a corgi that rules my life.
Okay.
I have, a corgi is a dog that is very bossy and stubborn and is at my feet right now. And we go on long walks a lot together. I like to, what do I like to do? I like to do a little bit of like art and just kind of gardening as well. I got into this year. So I like going out for a nice walk at the coast, and Hope Hill is good. That's near me as well. And otherwise, reading, big into reading.
Yeah.
So like my novels, but then I read my educational books as well. It took me way longer to get through. I think that's mostly me.
Well, if you've opened up a can of worms here that I need to ask the question, because I do this every time. I never like lead the guest on, but if they bring it up, I need to have a follow up question. Do you have a favorite novel?
Oh, a favorite. Um, there's a few, but one just jumped into my head, so I'll pick that. The Princess Bride.
See, that's the second time that's come up.
Oh,
And yeah, that's the second time that's come up in the podcast. Now, obviously, I've seen the film. Very good. No.
Oh, the films are never as good. Only
Yeah,
Lord of
you
the Rings
see
did that well.
that's
Like, yeah, no, the
that's the
film
thing. I haven't got to compare it to the book, and
yeah.
I do agree that obviously the books are always better than films, bar The Godfather. But yeah, I actually quite like the film, but it has come up a couple of times before, and it's when I watch the film, I kind of think, what would the book be like? You know, because I can't, I can't really explain it actually. How do I see the book? I don't really.
Yeah,
Do you know what I mean?
that's why I think it doesn't work. Like because they have
Yeah.
to convert something that's really witty and funny
Mm,
in between the dialogue as well. So,
yeah.
but they're like, how do you get that across? And they don't portray the book exactly as it's done. Of course, film adaptations rarely do. So even the princess isn't done the way I would like the way the book portrays. Like she's
Right.
very silly in the book, and it's very like vain, but it's like it's just done well, and it's very amusing, and I think it's well worth a read.
I'm gonna read it because that's.
Yeah.
I mean, if a book comes up once, I'm like, it must be good, yeah. But then if it comes up twice, it's almost a sign. I don't believe in signs, but it's almost like a sign. I would be like it with I read a lot as much as I can. I do find it very relaxing, and I do have. Not that I read for work, but I definitely read the kind of heavier books sometimes, and they do take a while to get through. But I do like the having two on the go, like where I can have the novel and then I can have the more serious stuff. Like I thought it was very serious coming up on the train there yesterday, reading Samuel Beckett novel. Kind of half of it, I don't know what's going on, but it's very enjoyable because it's a different kind of prose that I'm not used to. So you're kind of like, what is happening here? Like I'll need to read back over that paragraph to kind of understand what's happening. But then, I like reading, the silly stuff as well, and the more kind of things that you can kind of relax to. It's like people ask me why I watch so many horror films. Well, the reason I watch them is because I don't really need to think about them that much. So if I'm watching a horror or a comedy, I can be, tired, or I can be in a mood or whatever it is. I don't have to overthink it. But if I'm watching something a bit more serious, then I feel like I need to be I need to be in it. I can't just knock on a 3 hour, German film and then just sit there and kind of chill out. It's not that kind of film. You need to be on your toes. So I do that with books as well. So I kind of, but you mentioned art as well. Do you mean drawing, painting? What kind of stuff do you mean?
Not very. I just mean I pick a picture, usually a cartoon or animation type thing, and I just copy it. So that's the extent of my artistic skill from a childhood. I never progressed further than that, but I do enjoy it. I got back into it more during the pandemic, and I just kind of want to make myself do a little bit more because it's just one of those things where sometimes it's hard to get started on it, but then once you're doing it, it's always really enjoyable, and you come out of it just feeling like you just did something that was quiet and nice, and you created something as well. I think there's a nice little feeling with that. Like you just made this thing, it's out on the page now, and hopefully it looks well. If it doesn't, I just whatever doesn't matter. But I've usually got some criticisms around it, but I'm like, it's okay, it looks good enough in this section.
Well, that's the whole thing, though. It doesn't matter. It's like, I have a friend who's an art therapist, and I'll try and explain a little bit what I kind of took from when she was on, but she's brilliant. But she talks just about like, getting the page, getting your supplies, whatever it might be whatever you're using, and just drawing. And that, mindfulness is obviously a massive thing anyway for all of us. But like, it's that whole thing about art. Is it good or is it bad, or is it, does it have to be the black and white situation where it's good or bad, or can it just be like quirky, or can it be, there's so many different things it can be. Like we're not all going to be perfect artists. Like Picasso, I'm not even sure he was that good. That's so controversial. No, I don't mean that obviously, but I mean like, compared to others who look like Caravaggio or something that's like
Yes.
the lines and the way he uses light and all that, and you're kind of going, geez, how does anyone even think of that? Like in the 1500s, whenever it was, 1400s. And then you look at Picasso and you're like, yeah, that's a bit shit. But like, it's not like, it's
Different.
different.
Hmm.
That's
Yeah.
what it is.
You
So
get to interpret it yourself.
yeah,
You decide. That's the whole thing about art. Like you say whether it's good or bad,
yeah.
and you say about your own things as well.
And that goes for every art. That goes for books and goes for films as well. It's like one of the worst films, like I could really like and you could hate it. Like the worst film ever made. I don't like bringing this up all the time, but I do get some thrill from it. Is Ferris Bueller's Day Off. That's the worst film that's ever been made. Okay, but most people love it. So I'll continue to wave the flag of how it is singularly the most annoying character in movie history, but people will go like, well, he's good in it, like he's fun and all that, and it's like he's obnoxious, but
Yeah.
kind of having a conversation with myself here, Fiona, I apologize. But besides all that, let's get to an important part of this. Where can people find you? Obviously your business, both physically and then online and things like that.
Yeah, so my practice is in Raheny, Dublin 5, and it's in the Raheny Shopping Centre. I'm on Google Maps, you can find that. I call it TOP, so it's Therapy for Optimal Performance. And my name is Fiona Mernagh, so if you at Fiona Mernagh for Instagram, you'll find me there as well. My website is top-therapy.com.
Excellent. Go and have a look. See if there's, I think it's a place that would draw me in because of its tidiness. I'm a sucker. I'm a sucker for tidiness and neat lines as well. I really love it. But listen, people, go and have a look. Look up Fiona. Have a look on Instagram, obviously. And if you're in the Dublin area, even if you're not in the Dublin area, if you're in Athlone, where I'm from, go and have a chat with Fiona if you are having some problems. Like I think Fiona broke it down very well there about the idea of with pain and things like that, how we can get better, and we just need to well, first of all, we need to listen to our physical therapist to actually do the stuff that we're supposed to do. But yeah, we'll go along from there. Fiona, you've been a fantastic guest. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much for having me on. It's been great.
Oh, you're more than welcome. Listen, hang around me for a second. I'll do the usual closing out of this. We'll get a photo and then we'll go and have something, go and have our dinner or something, it's nearly that time. I think there's Ireland are playing today. Yeah, they are.
Oh, yeah.
Well, half of Blackrock will be in the pubs now watching that. All right. So thanks very much to John for the tech stuff. I always thank my mum, my dad, my granddad, Jern Calvin for all the reasons I mention every episode. Subscribe to our YouTube channel if you would. We're on Facebook, Instagram, and X. It's so silly. We're also on Spotify, Apple, Anchor, Google Podcasts, etc. All those ones. And yeah, obviously, everyone, thanks very much for watching or listening, wherever you did so. And once again, Fiona, thanks a lot.
Thanks a million.
Everyone else, we'll see you next week. Bye.